The House voted to repeal the estate tax, also known as the death tax, setting the stage for a showdown in the Senate. President Obama's threatened to veto that legislation and, as usual, is trying to make hardworking Americans, successful Americans, the bad guys.
They're also pushing a new $270 billion tax cut for the very wealthiest of the wealthiest. It would affect about 5,000 families all across America for $270 billion, which is the cost approximately of the tax breaks I'm giving to 44 million people. Their plan would cut taxes for the top 0.1% and let taxes go up on 25 million working families and students. And my view is we don't need tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. I don't need a tax cut.
So you work your whole life, you build up a few assets or a successful business, and President Obama and the liberals think they're entitled to steal a huge chunk of it. Wonder where you got that idea.
If you've been successful, you didn't get there on your own. If you got a business, you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
So President Obama, kind of like the Gordon Gekko of government.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
So, Dana, why on God's green earth do politicians think that after you work your whole life, they can steal 40% more of it?
Well, partly because the government is an insatiable beast that has to continually be fed. If there was ever a reason for tax reform, it is not just this one, but this whole month when everybody is working feverishly to pay their taxes. The date for this year was April 18th. Everybody works from January 1st to April 18th. All that money up until then goes to the government. Then you get to keep the rest of the money that you're earning. I think tax reform is the answer to this, and so is economic growth. I think that is the most important thing. The more growth we would have in the economy, the better the Treasury would be, and the better workers would be, and the more money people would have to invest.
Okay, so the estate is taxed at 40% over $5 million if it's an individual, at $10 million if it's a couple, but that's money that's already been taxed.
Yeah, that's basically
it's been through the ringer once.
It's double dipping on the dead.
True.
It's corpse robbery without the shovel. But here, this is how wrong President Obama is. If it's only a few thousand families, and so why should you care? It's only 5,000 families. Why should you care? That's his argument. Why is it a big deal? It is because the reason why it's so specifically focused on a small circle of people is because if they get it any wider, there would be hell to pay. We know it's theft. What he's counting on is the pettiness of human envy. That people will say, I agree with you, President Obama, that's not me. His philosophy is, if it's not you and it's them, who the hell cares? He's preying on the sickest part of humanity, which is they're rich, screw them. You could do that to anybody.
You know, Juan, sometimes these businesses, the owners of these businesses, they've been in the family for years, they put all their money back into it. They reinvest all the money back into the business. So when someone dies and they want to leave it to an heir, they're charged 40% of the value. Sometimes they have, in the case of farmers, sometimes they have to sell farmland.
Yeah,
just to pay
because
the inheritance
they're
tax.
land rich and cash poor.
Right.
So they have to sell off the land in order to pay the death tax.
Do you like this idea of death tax?
I like an inheritance tax, if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think death tax loaded language, but I mean, if I keel over, I hope you'll take care of the kids. But I think that this is a situation where Republicans are looking after what President Obama rightly calls super rich people. I mean,
it's a principle, Juan.
That's a good way to put it, Craig. I think that you're onto something. I don't think it's about the 5,000 people. Mm-hmm. I don't think these are people, more than, only time you pay this tax is if you're more than 5 million, as you said, 10 million if you're a couple. That's a tiny, I think it's less. It's
5,400 couples or situations.
Yeah, so it's less than 0.10%.
So what?
But
Very
what difference
little.
does that make if you're saying,
it makes a difference because if you take away that revenue, Kimberly, then that means that you can't have.
It is
revenue.
Then you can't.
You have to find that money for the government from somebody else. You can't have cuts for the one.
Argue the principle then.
Yes.
You said I was right on principle. Argue the principle.
The principle is, and this is really what interests me, is that I think that people who earn money should, in fact, be able to give it to kids and all that. But at some point, you do have to have a cutoff. And we shouldn't be supporting the Paris Hiltons and saying, oh, you don't, the middle class is going to have to work harder to pay more taxes. But you, Paris Hilton, you get all that money.
I know.
Take it all.
You see where that
you're
mentality is.
demonized.
That's a mentality.
Yeah.
That's punitive based on envy.
Punitive.
It's punitive.
Envy? Yeah, but
I
I
don't
don't have
like
any
Paris
envy.
Hilton because she's rich. Take the money.
No. I believe in America that Eric, you, Dana, and I, you know what? Get out there and hustle. You got smart. You got an advantage to be born to Greg Gutfeld. So you have advantages from birth. It doesn't. You don't have to get zillions and zillions plus
KG,
zillions.
Juan mirrored something President Obama just said there. It's what did you call it? It's a revenue flow, a revenue.
There is added revenue.
It's taxes. These people
Well,
earn that
it
money
is.
themselves.
And it's punishment. It's punishment for families to say, well, we're going to pick on you. We're going to single you out because for some reason or another, your family's been good at making money. It's not a good enough reason to say we're going to do this because we don't like the Paris Hiltons of the world. That defeats your whole argument. Tell me why it's a good policy, why it is good for the economy, why you think that it's better that the government can do a better job with that money than leaving it with a family that might reinvest it into the revenue stream, that might open more businesses or employ more people. Why isn't that okay? Why is it okay to penalize hardworking families like farm families? When they first have the land, it's worth this much. There's land value appreciation, farm equipment, and a lot of those families fall into this group, and then they can't continue on with their family business. That is a real example of who this impacts in America today,
All right.
not Paris Hilton on a tractor.
Okay, let me just say, because I'm really taking this quite seriously. I appreciate what you're saying.
Thank you.
I went and I looked and I said, well, how many farm families really have to pay this tax? Because what I was saying earlier to Eric was, it's really a small percent. It's less than a tenth of a percent of Americans ever have to pay this tax because it's 5 million, 10 million if you're a couple. It says here only 0.6% of farm estates needed to pay this tax in 2013. So we're really not talking
But
about.
that's because enough farm people didn't die to
No,
make
oh,
it
no,
make
I'm
it
saying-
better?
well,
Is that
it's
your problem?
It's the old,
And they-
it's the old one. It's the old class warfare, though.
What
Pick, as
class
Greg points
warfare?
out, pick on the wealthy because they're an easy target. Because there are so many people who don't have that stature that everyone wants.
But
to
don't you have to
interesting
pay
thing-
tax? Doesn't the government have to support itself somehow?
I don't think the government deserves
Right.
to take money from the dead. This isn't about expanding government. This is about creating, in a sense, more division. What it does too is it's a great thing for an election. Right now, you've got 4 people here defending really, really rich people. The left loves that, and if they can get a politician,
And we're not even them.
I know exactly. Well, speak for yourself. You should see my underwater mansion.
Just wait till that book comes out.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the principle that really bothers me is the fact that it's double taxed.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And if the government wants to be honest about it, then try to pass a bill, Mr. President, that would raise those taxes on the income taxes while they're living.
But she's
or on
right.
the investment. I mean, if the liberals want to actually try to capture this money from very wealthy people, they should do it while they're living and try to be honest about it. But they're not going to do that because a lot of those rich people that fall into that category are actually Democratic supporters.
John
And they
Kerry.
still vote.
Pelosi.
Right.
Kimberly, the
Hollywood.
mentality, the liberal mentality is that everything belongs to the state.
Yeah, right.
Why don't they take 100%?
Because it's
Just
entitlement
take the
and
whole-
it's all about. Yeah, I mean, really, why don't you? Why don't you just leave us 1% and we can just, live off
1%
of
for the 1%.
top ramen every day? I don't know. The problem is come up with a good solution, comprehensive tax reform that makes sense and works for all Americans. Don't single out and punish people because they've been good at getting the green. Why don't you think about, hey, I want to make sure that you and your family can get good at getting the green too. So let's do what we can to stimulate the economy. Let's not penalize and overregulate small businesses or entrepreneurship so people aren't saying, you know what, I don't like Obamacare, I don't like this and that, I can't afford to have more employees. That's what's just wrong with this thinking. This is such a populist, pathetic type of tax to say, I just want to punish the rich. There's no good, sound economic principle behind it.
A friend of mine once said, Juan, anytime you need a job, who do you go ask? You go ask someone who's rich, someone who owns a company, someone who's providing in our society, a capitalist. So I'm a capitalist. I'm all for it, Kimberly.
I feel you.
But I am not. When I live in a country where we have increasing levels of poverty, even as we're doing better these days, but we have a high level of poverty. We have lots of people on food stamps. We've got military in need. and we've got sequestration. I'm thinking to myself,
how is
government's not going to take care of
somebody's
that.
got to pay
Yeah,
for all this. And you know what? We
That's
all
not
have
enough
to pay.
you honestly think that taxing these families, that's not what it's about. It's
That's
not
not
about
what
helping the military.
It's not.
No.
This is about making Republicans look evil. The more
Right.
that we can sit there and defend.
Demonize.
I'm defending a principle. I'm not defending the rich.
Right.
I believe that this is actual theft.
See, I think you're onto something, and I really appreciate this argument because, okay, so you're defending the principle and not the rich. But yesterday, what we saw in the House was overwhelmingly Republicans said, couch this argument in terms of you're stealing from the rich. Why are Republicans doing that to themselves?
Stealing from the rich, it's true, but the principle is, going back, you are actually taking something that's already been taxed. That is actual theft. If this person who spent 30 years of his life, 40 years of his life working and paying taxes every single year dies, and then this guy shows up and says, I want more. He's stealing from that. He's stealing from the dead.
Technically stealing from
living.
him while he's living and then
Yeah.
steals the rest of, or a good portion of it when he dies.